In a world that often prioritizes wealth, status, and success, it's easy to forget what truly matters: the kindness of a stranger. Imagine a quiet afternoon, a flat tire, and a young boy whose simple act of goodwill sets off a chain of events that forever changes the lives of two very different people. This is the story of Matthew Evans, a wealthy retiree who thought he had everything he needed, and Elijah, a humble young boy who taught him a lesson about generosity, connection, and what it means to truly live. Matthew, accustomed to a life of luxury, found himself stranded on a lonely road in Kentucky, facing a problem that even his wealth couldn't solve. In a moment of frustration, a young boy appeared, not asking for anything in return, but offering nothing more than help. What followed was a series of encounters that revealed the raw power of human kindness. As Matthew's life had been defined by deals and transactions, he had long forgotten the joy of selfless giving. But Elijah, with his quiet dignity, had something Matthew didn't: true humility. From that moment, a bond was formed, one that neither time nor money could sever. What began as a simple act of kindness soon blossomed into something much greater: a story of change, growth, and the rediscovery of life's most important values. This is not just a tale about a man and a boy. It's a reminder that sometimes it's the smallest gestures that have the power to transform everything. Get ready to journey through a story that proves the old adage right: it's not about what you have, but what you give. Matthew Evans sat behind the wheel of his silver Mercedes, the air conditioner barely making a dent in the scorching Kentucky heat. The sun beat down relentlessly, its rays causing the asphalt to shimmer, and Matthew's patience was thinning with every passing minute. The luxurious life he had built, one of deals, investments, and fine things, seemed so far away now. Here he was, stranded on the side of a quiet country road, with a flat tire and no way to call for help. His phone had no signal, and all he could do was wait. Frustration bubbled up inside him as he stared at the flat tire. He was used to solving problems with a phone call, a few clicks, or a few $100s. But here, in this moment, all his wealth and influence meant nothing. He felt small, vulnerable, and alone. His mind wandered, filled with thoughts of the business empire he had built, the dinners with colleagues, and the endless negotiations. He had spent his life chasing success, but now, none of it seemed to matter. Just as he began to resign himself to the long wait, he saw a figure approaching in the distance. A young boy, maybe 13 or 14, walked down the road, his steps steady but not hurried. The boy wore a faded t-shirt and worn-out sneakers, his hair tousled by the wind. He wasn't a figure of wealth or privilege, but there was something about him, something Matthew couldn't quite place, that caught his attention. The boy stopped a few feet away from the car, his eyes immediately scanning the situation. "Got a flat, sir?" he asked, his voice steady and calm. It was a simple question, but the way he asked it, with such confidence and assurance, made Matthew pause. "Yeah," Matthew replied, a mixture of relief and unease swirling in his chest. "I could use some help, but my phone's got no signal." The boy nodded, a small smile forming on his face. "I can help with that," he said, and without another word, he bent down to examine the tire. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness. The boy simply got to work. As he worked, Matthew stood there, watching him in silence. The boy was focused, his hands moving with a quiet efficiency that spoke of experience. He worked as though changing a tire was second nature to him, something he had done 1,000 times before. There was a calmness in his movements, a quiet confidence that made Matthew feel, for the first time in a long while, like he was witnessing something pure. The boy finished quickly, stepping back with a small, satisfied smile. "All done," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. Matthew stood there, still holding the money he had pulled from his wallet. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to offer it to the boy. He had just been helped by a stranger, and it seemed only right to give something in return. But the boy took a step back, raising his hand politely. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But I don't need anything. I'm just happy to help." Matthew was stunned. The boy didn't want money. He wasn't looking for anything in return. The simplicity of the gesture, the purity of it, hit Matthew harder than he expected. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The boy turned and began to walk away, his back straight, his head held high. Matthew stood frozen, the money still in his hand. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was watch as the boy's figure grew smaller in the distance. The weight of that moment settled heavily on Matthew's chest. He had been given something he hadn't expected, something he hadn't even known he needed. And for the first time in years, he felt small. Not because of his wealth, but because of the simple, profound truth that had just been handed to him in that fleeting moment. A young boy with worn shoes and a humble heart had given him something priceless. A reminder that true kindness has no price tag. As the boy walked away, Matthew stood frozen, watching him disappear down the dusty road. His hand, still holding the money, hung limp at his side. He wanted to call out to the boy, to tell him he had changed something in him, to ask why he hadn't taken the money. But he didn't. He couldn't. The words felt heavy, trapped somewhere deep inside, tangled in a mix of confusion and emotion he didn't know how to process. What had just happened? Matthew's mind raced, replaying the scene over and over. The boy's quiet confidence, his selflessness, the way he worked without expectation, without asking for anything in return. There was something about the boy's presence, his simple kindness, that hit Matthew harder than he cared to admit. For a man who had spent his life building an empire, negotiating deals, and making transactions, this was a foreign concept. There was no price to pay here, no offer to counter, no business to seal. Just a pure act of goodwill. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the world around him fading into the background as he tried to make sense of the emotions swirling inside. It wasn't just the boy's actions. It was the way he had made Matthew feel. Something was shifting inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of humility, a sense of being small in the face of something much larger than money, much larger than success. As he finally climbed into his car and started the engine, Matthew's thoughts kept drifting back to the boy. The image of him walking away, his steps light and unburdened, stayed with him. There was a dignity in that boy, an integrity that had nothing to do with wealth or status. It was as if he carried with him something Matthew had lost along the way. A sense of purpose that wasn't tied to a paycheck, a sense of worth that didn't depend on how many zeros were in a bank account. For the first time in years, Matthew felt a twinge of shame. How had he lost touch with what really mattered? He thought of his own life, his mansion, his cars, his business deals. All of it seemed meaningless now. For so long, he had defined himself by the number of zeros in his bank account, the number of successful deals under his belt. But standing there, watching that boy walk away with nothing but a smile, Matthew realized he had been chasing the wrong things. It wasn't until now that Matthew truly understood the weight of what the boy had given him. It wasn't just a tire that had been changed. It wasn't just a favor done out of kindness. It was something far deeper, something that reached into Matthew's heart and pulled him back from a place he hadn't known he was lost. The boy's simple, selfless gesture had broken through the walls Matthew had built around himself, walls made of wealth, pride, and an unspoken belief that success was measured in dollars and power. But in that moment, Matthew had been reminded of something much more precious than any material possession. The power of kindness, the value of humanity, and the truth that it's not about what you have, but what you give. As Matthew drove away, he couldn't help but feel a stirring in his chest, a quiet ache, a longing for something more than the life he had created. He wasn't sure what that something was yet, but he knew one thing for certain. It had started with a boy and a flat tire. The next morning, Matthew could think of nothing else. The boy's face, his calm, self-assured smile, the way he had walked away without a second glance, leaving Matthew standing there with his hand still outstretched, haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that image. The boy's figure shrinking into the distance, fading with every passing moment. It wasn't just the help, it wasn't just the kindness. It was something deeper, something unspoken that made Matthew feel as if he had missed something important. Something crucial. He had to find him. Matthew didn't even know why. The thought of seeing the boy again, of thanking him properly, consumed him in a way he couldn't explain. He hadn't felt this unsettled in years. It was as if the boy had unlocked a door inside him. a door he hadn't realized was even there, and now all Matthew could think about was what was on the other side. But he couldn't just leave it at that, not after the way the boy had turned down his money so gracefully. He needed to understand that, so without thinking twice, Matthew got into his car and drove back to the stretch of road where it had all started. His heart was pounding in his chest as he navigated the same turns, passed the same small farms, and looked out for any sign of the boy. His mind raced with a million questions. What kind of life did the boy lead? What kind of family raised someone so kind, so willing to help a complete stranger without expecting anything in return? He had no answers, only an overwhelming need to find him. Matthew's hands tightened around the steering wheel as the minutes stretched on. He had already driven for over an hour, but there was no sign of the boy, no trace of the figure he had seen yesterday. The anxiety gnawed at him. What if he had missed him? What if the boy was gone, never to be found again? The road seemed endless, and with each passing mile, Matthew's nervousness grew. His thoughts became a jumble of frustration and uncertainty. Had he made a mistake? Should he turn around and go back? His mind kept whispering doubts, pushing him to stop. But Matthew ignored it. He couldn't stop now. He had to know more. Eventually, at a small gas station, an elderly woman behind the counter looked up as he walked in. Matthew hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the moment he asked, he was crossing a line, intruding on someone else's life, but he couldn't help it. "Excuse me," he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm looking for a boy, maybe 14, wearing an old t-shirt and sneakers. I think his name is Elijah. Have you seen him?" The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, as if considering his request. For a long moment, the silence felt unbearable. Matthew's anxiety bubbled to the surface. What if she said no? What if she didn't know the boy? Finally, she spoke. "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "That boy's always helping people around here. He lives over in Harlan." Harlan. Matthew's heart skipped a beat. He had a name, a place. The puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place, but the urgency was still there. He had to find him. He thanked the woman quickly, paid for a bottle of water, and rushed back to his car. The road ahead suddenly feeling both closer and farther than ever. He had to get to Harlan. He had to find the boy, and he didn't know why, but the feeling gnawed at him like a hunger he couldn't satisfy, like something was missing and only Elijah could complete it. The drive to Harlan felt like an eternity. The weight of his own nervousness pressed heavily against his chest. The closer he got, the more he feared that it might be too late, that he might never find Elijah again. When Matthew arrived in Harlan, he felt a strange mix of excitement and dread settle in his chest. The town, nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians, was small and quiet, its streets lined with modest homes and sleepy businesses. Nothing about it resembled the polished, manicured neighborhoods he was used to. It was far removed from the world he had built, where wealth and success dictated every interaction. Here, in this humble town, Matthew felt like an outsider, a visitor in a world he didn't quite understand. He followed the directions he had been given, his heart pounding as he neared the house where Elijah lived. With each turn, the anticipation grew, and with it, a gnawing unease. What was he going to say? How could he possibly explain why he was there? He had no plan, just a vague sense that he needed to meet this family, that somehow they held the answers to a question he hadn't even known he was asking. Matthew pulled up to the house. A small, weathered place that looked lived in and loved, though the years had clearly taken their toll. The porch sagged slightly under its own weight, and the windows, though clean, were covered in faded curtains. There was nothing extravagant about the house. No polished marble floors or sleek modern furnishings. Just simple, honest comfort. It was so different from everything Matthew knew. And yet, as he sat in his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was in the right place. He knocked on the door, his heart racing. It opened almost immediately, revealing a woman in her early 40s. She looked tired, but there was a warmth in her eyes that immediately put him at ease. Her sharp gaze took him in, sizing him up as he stood on her doorstep, unsure of how to begin. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Matthew cleared his throat. Good morning. I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I met your son yesterday. Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire. At the mention of Elijah's name, the woman's expression softened. A small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, and for a moment, Matthew thought he saw something like pride in her eyes. That sounds like my Elijah, she said, stepping aside to let him in. He's always helping people. You're welcome to wait. He's out back. Matthew stepped inside, his nerves returning. The house was cozy, filled with old but clean furniture. Family photos adorned the walls alongside hand-drawn pictures, presumably from a much younger Elijah. It was a stark contrast to the sleek, sterile elegance of his own home. But there was a liveliness to this place, a warmth that Matthew hadn't realized he was missing. He could feel the love in the air, the sense of belonging that seemed to pulse through the walls. Elijah's mother led him out to the backyard, where Elijah was busy repairing a fence. The boy looked up in surprise when he saw Matthew approaching. His face was calm, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes as he wiped his hands on his jeans. Hey, mister, Elijah said, his voice easy, like he had known Matthew his whole life. What are you doing here? Matthew smiled, a little awkwardly. I wanted to thank you again for helping me yesterday. You didn't have to, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Elijah shrugged, his face breaking into a small, humble smile. It wasn't a big deal, but to Matthew it was a huge deal. The boy's simple, unassuming kindness had shaken him to his core. And now, standing in this humble backyard, he realized how much he needed to give something back. Something more than just a thank you. The nervousness he had felt earlier seemed to fade as he stood there, taking in the sight of Elijah and his family. Despite the worn-down house and modest surroundings, there was a quiet strength about them, a resilience that Matthew admired, even envied. But as he stood there, unsure of what to do next, he couldn't help but feel a pang of nervousness once again. Would they accept his offer? Would they understand why he wanted to do something for them? Or would they refuse, as Elijah had done with the money? Just as the silence became too much, Elijah's mother called out from the porch, Elijah, you better come inside and wash up before lunch. Elijah glanced toward the house, then back at Matthew. You want to join us? It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome to. Matthew hesitated for a moment, surprised by the invitation. But there was something so sincere in her voice, so welcoming, that he couldn't refuse. I'd like that, he said, his heart lighter than it had been in days as he followed them inside. Matthew couldn't help but feel like he was stepping into a world that was real in a way his life had never been. A place where kindness, family, and a simple meal meant more than any business deal or stock portfolio ever could. The warmth of the home wrapped around him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be as the lunch went on. Matthew's mind couldn't focus on the food. He had been welcomed into Elijah's humble home, surrounded by laughter and warmth. Yet all he could think about was the overwhelming sense of discomfort that gnawed at him. It was unsettling, the way this modest family, this humble home, was so different from everything he had spent his life building. He had entered their world expecting to offer something in return for Elijah's kindness. But it was quickly becoming clear that this wasn't about giving them money or goods. It was something far more complicated. Matthew sat at the small kitchen table, looking at the mismatched plates, the simple meal Elijah's mother had prepared. There was nothing lavish about it. The vegetables were homegrown, the bread baked fresh, the stew rich with flavor but made from ingredients that didn't come with a high price tag. The smell of home cooking filled the air, a far cry from the catered dinners he was used to. Yet, in this moment, surrounded by a family who had so little but gave so much, Matthew felt a strange emptiness inside him. It wasn't a hunger for food. It was something deeper, something he hadn't realized was missing from his own life. As Elijah's mother spoke about the community, about how people looked out for one another, Matthew's mind wandered. She was describing a world he had forgotten, a world where people helped each other because they wanted to, not because there was a transaction involved, not because there was an expectation of anything in return. The realization hit him like a cold wave. He had been living in a world built on deals, on negotiations, on the constant pursuit of success. And yet, none of it had brought him peace. None of it had brought him the connection he saw here, around this small table, where food was shared not just as sustenance, but as a bond. That he glanced at Elijah, who was talking about his dreams of becoming an engineer, a quiet ambition that shone through his words. There was something about the boy's innocence, his simplicity, that was so pure. He had hopes, dreams, and yet he didn't seem to measure his worth by how much money he would make or what success he would achieve. He was content in his own skin, in his own life. Elijah was already richer than Matthew in a way he hadn't even realized until now. The thought made Matthew's chest tighten. This family, with their worn furniture and patched-up fences, had something he had long forgotten to value: purpose. Elijah's selflessness, his quiet dignity, was something Matthew could only admire from a distance. The boy had helped him without a second thought, without any desire for a return, while Matthew had spent his entire life chasing something that could never fill the hole inside of him. When the meal was over, Elijah's mother offered him a seat on the porch, a cup of iced tea in hand. As he took the glass, the coldness of the tea contrasted with the heat in his chest. He felt a rush of conflicting emotions: guilt, gratitude, confusion. He had wanted to do something grand for them, to repay the kindness Elijah had shown him. But now, sitting on the porch of this humble home, Matthew realized that no amount of money or material possessions could ever repay the gift they had given him. He was caught in the tension between the man he had become and the man he knew he wanted to be. Should he keep pushing for more, for bigger gestures? Or should he let go of the pursuit of wealth and finally listen to the quiet voice inside him, the one that had been drowned out for so long by the noise of his own success? The question haunted him as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the porch. He didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time he was beginning to see a different path. The boy, the family, the simplicity of their life. It all pointed towards something Matthew had been searching for without even realizing it. But the deeper question remained. Could he let go of the world he had built? Could he embrace this new way of living, one where kindness mattered more than success? His heart ached with the possibility of change, but the uncertainty was overwhelming. For the first time in years, Matthew was uncertain of what the future would hold, and it terrified him. The morning after Matthew's visit to Elijah's home, a sudden and unexpected flurry of activity overtook Harlan. Matthew, determined to give back to the family who had unknowingly opened his eyes to a life of meaning beyond wealth, had set a plan in motion. It wasn't enough to simply thank them. He wanted to show Elijah and his mother that there was more to life than survival, that they deserved something greater than the modest home they had lived in for so long. Matthew had made calls. A lot of calls. He reached out to contractors, suppliers, and business partners, each one puzzled by the unexpected request to renovate a house in a small town like Harlan. But Matthew was relentless. He spoke of gratitude, of the boy who had changed his life with nothing more than a helping hand. And before long, a plan was set in motion. Trucks and workers arrived at the house, and the quiet street was suddenly alive with the sound of construction. Matthew watched from the sidewalk as the crew unloaded supplies, his heart racing with excitement and anxiety. Would they accept this? Would Elijah's mother see this as an intrusion? Would they feel embarrassed, overwhelmed by such a grand gesture? He couldn't bear the thought of them refusing or turning him away, so he made sure to arrive early and be there when the workers began to as the renovations began. Elijah and his mother stood by, watching in disbelief. Their house was suddenly teeming with life, with people tearing down old walls and replacing them with fresh, sturdy materials. The sagging porch was replaced with new, strong wood. The rusted swing set in the backyard was hauled away and replaced with a shiny new one. Inside, the floors were polished, the walls repainted with bright colors that breathed life into the rooms. The kitchen, once outdated and cramped, was transformed into a modern space with sleek new appliances. At first, Elijah tried to help, carrying planks of wood and sweeping debris with enthusiasm. But Matthew, seeing the boy's eagerness, stopped him gently. "Your job," he said with a smile, "is to enjoy being a kid for a little while longer. Elijah's face lit up with a grin as he reluctantly put down the tools and began watching the workers with rapt attention. His curiosity growing by the minute as the weeks passed, Matthew continued to oversee the work, ensuring that every detail was taken care of. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as the house began to take shape. It wasn't just the physical transformation that mattered, it was the change it symbolized. For the first time, Elijah and his mother would have a home that was safe, comfortable, and truly theirs. A home that reflected the warmth and love they had always shown, but never had the means to express. But as the house neared completion, Matthew began to feel something unexpected. The house, now filled with light and color, seemed to be a reflection of his own transformation. It was as if the walls and the floors had absorbed the lessons he had learned in this place. That the best things in life aren't bought, but given freely. That true success isn't measured in money, but in the impact you have on the people around you. One afternoon, as the final touches were being made, Elijah stood in the newly renovated living room, his hands in his pockets, looking around. His eyes were wide with amazement, but there was something else in his gaze. Something deeper. Matthew could see the boy was struggling to process what had happened, to understand why someone like him, someone who had so little, deserved such a gift. "You didn't have to do all this?" Elijah said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and confusion. Matthew, standing beside him, felt a lump form in his throat. "It's not about what you need, Elijah," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's about what you've already given me. Your kindness, your heart, that's what changed everything." And in that moment, Matthew realized something profound. The house wasn't the only thing being renovated. His life, his outlook, his entire existence had been transformed by one boy's simple act of kindness. And now, as the home stood complete, so too did Matthew's understanding of what it truly meant to live. But as the final nail was hammered into place and the last brushstroke of paint dried, Matthew's excitement mixed with anxiety. What now? How would Elijah's family adjust to this new life, this new home, this new reality? Would they accept the change, or would they resist it, unsure of how to move forward? It was a question that would linger long after the workers left and the house became their home. As the final touches were put on the renovation, Matthew stood on the porch of Elijah's newly transformed home, his gaze sweeping across the yard. The once sagging porch now stood strong, the fresh coat of paint gleaming in the sunlight. The swing set, once rusted and barely standing, had been replaced by a shiny, sturdy one, with the chains gleaming in the afternoon light. Inside, the room sparkled with new energy. Polished floors, bright walls, and a kitchen that looked as though it had stepped out of a design magazine. The transformation was nothing short of magical. But for Matthew, it wasn't just about the house. It was about what it symbolized as he stood there, watching Elijah and his mother walk into their new home for the first time. A wave of emotion washed over him. This was more than just a physical renovation. It was a life-altering change for both the family and himself. It had all started with a simple act of kindness, a boy helping a man with a flat tire. In return, that one act had turned into something far bigger, a lesson in generosity, humility, and the deep importance of human connection. Elijah, his eyes wide with wonder, took a few hesitant steps into the living room, his hand brushing against the newly painted walls. He looked up at his mother, then back at the space around him. It was as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "This is our home?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. His mother stood behind him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Yes, Elijah, it's ours," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She looked at Matthew, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, almost as though she were afraid that such a grand gesture might be too much to accept. Matthew smiled warmly, his heart swelling with emotion. "You don't need to thank me. I should be the one thanking you." He paused for a moment, his words coming with more weight than he had anticipated. "You've shown me something I had forgotten. The power of kindness, the importance of family, and the strength that comes from living a life of purpose. Not wealth, not status, but genuine purpose." Elijah's mother looked at him, puzzled for a moment, Then understanding dawned in her eyes. "You found something here, haven't you?" she asked softly, her voice knowing. Matthew nodded, unable to speak at first. What could he say? How could he possibly convey how much this family, this simple life, had opened his eyes to everything he had been missing? The house was beautiful, yes, but it was the love within it, the warmth, the laughter, the genuine connection between these people that had touched him deeply. And it was more than that. It was a profound realization that his life had been about the wrong things. His success had been measured by the wrong standards. "Everything I've been chasing, everything I thought would make me happy, it doesn't compare to this," Matthew finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elijah, still standing in the middle of the living room, looked at Matthew with a shy but knowing smile. "You're part of this now, right? You're part of our family." The simplicity of the statement hit Matthew hard, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of belonging that wasn't tied to money or influence. He didn't need anything else. He had everything he needed right here, in this moment, with this family. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, neighbors began to trickle in, drawn by the news of the transformation. Matthew could hear their laughter and excited voices as they admired the house, offering their congratulations and bringing small gifts: a loaf of fresh bread, a jar of homemade jam, a potted plant. The scene was so ordinary, yet so extraordinary in its warmth. It was a reminder that true wealth was never measured in things, but in the relationships we nurture, the love we give, and the kindness we extend to others. As the evening wore on, Elijah and his friends ran around the yard, playing on the new swing set, their laughter filling the air. Matthew watched them, a smile spreading across his face. He realized that this moment, this simple, beautiful moment, was what life was all about. Not the meetings, the deals, or the luxury. It was the joy of a child, the comfort of a home, and the connection between people who cared for each other. Elijah's mother came over, offering him a glass of iced tea. "Would you like to join us for dinner?" she asked, her voice warm and inviting. Matthew, feeling more at home than he had in years, nodded. "I'd love to." As they sat down at the small table, Elijah's mother serving up a simple but delicious meal, Matthew couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. There were no grand gestures, no extravagant plans, just a shared meal, a conversation, and a sense of togetherness. For the first time in years, he was content that he realized that life wasn't about striving for more. It was about being present, about cherishing the small moments that made us human. In the kindness of a young boy and the humility of a family who had so little but gave so much, Matthew found the answers he had been searching for his entire life. And as the night fell and the stars twinkled overhead, Matthew knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for him. A chapter where kindness and connection would be his guiding principles, and where the pursuit of happiness would no longer be measured by the size of his bank account, but by the depth of his relationships and the love he shared with others. This, he realized, was the true meaning of wealth. As the days passed, Elijah's life was changing in ways he could never have imagined. What began with a simple act of kindness, helping a stranded man with a flat tire, had set in motion a chain of events that not only transformed his family's life, but his own future as well. He had always dreamed of becoming an engineer, but now, with the new home and the exposure to the world of construction, his dreams felt closer than ever. Matthew, who had become a mentor of sorts, encouraged Elijah to explore his curiosity about building and design. Matthew's visits became more frequent, not out of obligation, but because he truly believed in Elijah's potential. He arranged for Elijah to spend time with the workers who had helped renovate the house, teaching him about tools, measurements, and the intricate details of construction. Elijah was like a sponge, absorbing everything with an enthusiasm that was infectious. The boy had a natural talent, and it didn't take long for Matthew to realize that Elijah wasn't just curious. He was passionate. But it wasn't just the technical skills Elijah was gaining. Through Matthew's guidance, Elijah learned about perseverance, dedication, and the power of working hard for something you believe in. Matthew's influence wasn't about making Elijah a millionaire or pushing him into a life of luxury. It was about teaching him that hard work, integrity, and kindness could carry you farther than anything money could be. As Elijah's skills grew, so did his confidence. He was no longer just the boy who helped a stranger. He was a young man with a purpose, someone who could look at the world and see endless possibilities. And that sense of purpose was something that would stay with him throughout his life. Looking to the future, Elijah was excited. He knew that his journey had only just begun, but he was ready to face it head-on. With a new home, new skills, and a mentor who believed in him, Elijah saw endless opportunities ahead. Whether he chose to follow his passion for construction or pursue his dreams of becoming an engineer, one thing was clear: Elijah's future was bright. If you've been inspired by Elijah's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's so much more to come, and you won't want to miss the journey of this remarkable young man as he continues to chase his dreams. Let Elijah's story remind you that no matter where you start, with kindness, hard work, and a little help along the way, anything is possible. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories. Subscribe now and be part of this incredible adventure.